Okay. Um, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you for joining for our webinar today. Um, it's been good to be back. I've had um, lots on with counseling assignments and travel to US and things that have taken a pause. But I know a lot of you have said, where are the webinars and where are we? And so I wanted to put something in, and I'm so happy we've got a really special guest here um, to start us off for October. And I'm so excited to jump in, and we'll have more of a informal format and an interview style question and an opportunity to make it a bit more interactive because I know a lot of you have a lot of questions, and we have a fantastic guest who's very experienced in this field, and we're so happy he's here. Um, I will start off as we normally do with a reflection of the Quran. I've taken verses from Surah Al-Furqan, um, and the topic that we're discussing today is attachments. And what do we know about attachments? So I've chosen these verses from Surah Al-Furqan where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to the Prophet, and he's saying that they don't see you as a messenger. وَإِذَا رَأَوْكَ they when they see you, they don't take you except in ridicule, and they say, هَذَا الَّذِي بَعَثَ اللَّهُ رَسُولًا. Is this really the person who God sent as a messenger? And then the verse continues. It talks about he almost would have misled us from our gods. So uh, the audience here is people who believe in gods or multiple gods. He would have misled us from our gods had we not been satisfied in worship of them. But they're going to know when they see the punishment. So this is God saying, in Nakada, um, he would have almost misled us from our gods. And this is concept of gods, which I want to focus on. So the next ayah is a very famous ayah, which I'm sure a lot of you know. It's used a lot of times. Areta man atakhazallaha hawa. Have you seen the one who takes his God his own desire? So someone who takes desire, hawa is translated as desire. Ilaha is God. So have you seen the one who takes as his God his own desire? Would you choose to be a wakil? Would you choose to be a guardian or responsible for him? Someone who takes his own desire to be his God. The verse continues, Am yahsiba an aksarahum yasma'una aw yaqilun, or do you think, or do you imagine that most of them would hear or even reason? Do you think that someone in that capacity who has taken God as his desire as his God has the capacity to hear or reason? Um, Innahum ala kal'ain an'am. Verily, they are like cattle, livestock. And then God says, no, balhum adilla sabila. No, not even cattle. They're even more astray than cattle. So we have this concept of taking uh, your desire as essentially God or an identity or who you are, and how the desire can blind us from reason, from listening, um, and almost takes over us as who we are. So I thought this is a very famous verse. We can ponder on it, hopefully. We start off with that. Who are we? What do we do? So Strong Support is a peer support organization for Muslims who struggle with sexual or gender identity terms. If you're new and you don't know who we are, we provide a free consultation service, which you can book. It's a free 25-minute consultation. In terms that goes to the services we provide. What are the services we provide? We have video support circles on Zoom for men and women with SSA. We also have a circle for parents who struggle with children who have SSA. And we also have Arabic speaking circles for those who prefer, for men who prefer to have Arabic speaking circles. I also do one-to-one coaching on Fridays, Friday evenings. We do events like this, which are free to the public to have more education around this issue. So we have webinars completely free, open to anyone. They're also on our YouTube channel. And we have other volunteer-led projects. And if you want to be involved in some of the volunteer-led projects that we do, all of the support circles that we do are volunteer-led. Like we said, we're a peer support organization, so we're volunteer-led. So that's us. I'll head up and introduce our guest. It gives me great honor to invite Floyd because he helped me in my own journey. And I remember that it was 2012, 2013 when I started looking, and I was like, some of you know my first time I told was a human being was a counselor. I have same-sex attraction, and I was amazed that the world didn't collapse and didn't get struck by lightning. And at that time, I looked for resources which were there, and I came across a book which Dr. Godfrey had published in 2012, which was A Young Man's Healing Journey. And I was a young man back then, and that book really had a big impact on me. I read that and I was like, wow, I think Dr. Godfrey is a high achiever, a bit like me. My story was like that. I was a high achiever, and I really connected with his story, the story that he put forward, and how really practical tips which were in that book, and it had sections of to think of, and that's what I really like, and we'll discuss that in the book today, which we have, and we'll go through it. So it gives me an honor and to introduce Dr. Godfrey. For those that don't know, is a mental health coach. He does consulting around the globe, especially on issues related to mental health and sexuality. He is a certified clinical sexologist, certified Christian counselor, and certified sex addiction specialist supervisor, and also a certified mental health coach. He previously worked as LPC for 23 years, and as an approved supervisor with the Board of Behavioral Health. He received his education from Arizona State University and Ottawa University and the International Institute of Clinical Sexology. He worked for 9 years in the city of Tempe Social Services as a supervisor, assisting school-age children with their families. He's also worked in other settings, both professionally and within the ministry. He is a member of SASH, Society for Advancement of Sexual Health, as well as a CCC, the American Association of Christian Counselors. He's often known for his research and intervention for those who struggle with sexualized attachments and eroticized emotions. Uh, the book, which I was very lucky to get a signed copy from Dr. Godfrey at the IFTCC conference, which actually hoping I'm sure he's speaking there in a couple of weeks as well. Um, those of you who want to go there, we put that in our mailing list. If you want to go to that conference, let us know. Um, so we're predominantly going to be talking about this book today. So yeah, so there's been about 10 uh, years. I know he's also written, there's also a Band of Brothers program, I think, which you've written for books of, which I
Mhm.
also found. Maybe we can talk about that as well. This book in 2012 was key for me. It was very well written. What I really like about these books are they're not written for therapists, you know. Some of the books which sometimes you see about this literature are written for therapists, and it can be really difficult to understand some of those psychological concepts. These are very, very easy to read books. The one that we're going to be discussing, which is the Healing and Recovery, the most latest one, actually has questions, it has examples, it has spaces for you to fill in. And yes, and it has actually tools, so there's things like the check-in, the barometer, aim. There are different things which are there, tools which you can use. Um, if you want to know more, you can go to sexualizedattachments.com, and that is where you can get more information. So, um, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Godfrey.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Um, what I'm going to start off by saying what prompted you to maybe work in this sector, and maybe that has been changed from your recent experience. But when you started, what prompted you to work with young men with sexualized attachments?
Yeah, that's a good question. I started my professional career. Of course, I went to school to be a therapist. Spent several years, 8 years going to school for that. I really loved kids. I've always loved working with kids. I spent 10 years working at social services with children and families over there. And so I really always envisioned myself being a play therapist, working with young kids. So when I opened office and started working with families, I had a few kids who were struggling with sexual abuse or different trauma or confusion about their gender. And I was quite good at helping them, and in a way that could help provide insight for them. And so the more I was productive and doing it well, the more referrals were coming in for that. And I would say within a couple of years, because the issue is so misunderstood. And a lot of counselors at the time, of course, this is 25 years ago, they don't want to touch the topic. And I was willing. I was always willing and had some insights, and it just grew to the point that that's all I was doing full time, was working with and at that time it was probably adults as well as kids, working with all ages, sexual confusion, unwanted same-sex attractions, pornography addiction, sexual addiction, victims of abuse. And over the years, what I realized is that youth, so young men between the ages of perhaps 15 and 26, um, are even more underserved. Like they just don't have clinicians that understand how to help, what to do, nor even working with their age bracket. And so that's really what was the impetus for me to write the books and this most recent one, to provide some to try and fill the niche, try and fill the gap where young men and young men in college and young adults are trying to figure themselves out, and provide some information there, because I just don't think it's out there. I don't think the information is widely understood, nor is it marketed or talked about, even within the field of counseling,
Mhm.
depending on where you get your degree. And in the field of psychology, it's almost as if there's a specific uh, goal away from the common research and what we have known about these topics, and moving towards a very woke ideology. And so you're losing some of the research over the years because of that too. So it was really an effort to reach out and to try and help those who are struggling and need information. And I tried to write the book simple enough that a teenager could read it, as well as, of course, adults, but also that it would be simple enough to understand that clinicians who are untrained, or parents, or clergy, or simply friends could be able to pick it up and read it and understand, okay, here's what's going on. Here's where I could support. Here's where I could help. So I had a bit of that focus in it too. Want to be able to help the support base, especially for kids living at home. Parents don't know how to help, or a single mom doesn't know what to do. Or maybe it's some church leader, somebody at church or synagogue who wants to support but doesn't understand the topic. So I tried to be simple enough in those ways.
Fantastic. And I really hear it being driven by the scarcity of material which is available in these resources. And it's funny that you mentioned that the counseling programs perhaps don't take this vision. And attachment theory is something which is well known in counseling world. Bowlby, famously, and you had the different attachment types, which nowadays people, I have clients which say, yeah, I'm anxious avoidant. So the knowledge has spread
Yes.
where people know it really well. But to your point, when the attachment becomes sexualized, clinicians are forced to affirm and not explore, even if the client wants to explore and say, yeah, because of sexual abuse, I sexualized that attachment, and it makes perfect logic, it makes perfect sense, but exploring that is suddenly becomes political, or it becomes something that you would never imagine a, an exploration in psychology or an exploration in counseling would be viewed, which was client-led, would be viewed unethical.
Yeah, very much so. In my professional experience and my clinical observation, it's unethical to do what they're doing right now. The popular approach to affirm, like you said, when you're taught ethics in school at a basic level, you're supposed to find out where the client wants to go, what's going on, what their goals are, and then help them to understand why they might be experiencing what they're experiencing, not just to skip all of that and suddenly just affirm something. Uh, that's not clinically how you're supposed to work. So if a client is presenting to me For example, confusion about their gender. Well, we need to ethically uncover that. Well, what's underneath? What is it that's creating that confusion? To not explore some of those underlying issues, I think is a tragedy. It's unethical, it's not professional, it's harming people.
Have you had clients which have come to you, which have said, I've had to hide parts of myself to my other therapist because I was afraid that if I would talk about my sexualized attachments and my values around them, that they wouldn't understand or they would push to a different narrative upon me.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Clients who are afraid to say everything to their therapist and sometimes it's blatant. Here in the US, for example, depending on where you live, some areas are more liberal and more woke than others. I've had clients who have come to see me and they were afraid of their other therapist because there's a gay pride flag in the lobby.
Wow.
Well, and so immediately the client shuts down and they're not going to open up with that therapist.
Mhm.
Uh, it's almost pushing and creating an agenda where the client is going in as a blank slate asking for help. So yes, that's been frequent, and usually it only takes 1 or 2 sessions to provide some information, and the client is realizing, oh my goodness, I never. That makes sense. Like, why did no one ever explain this to me? It's a very simple concept, the idea of sexualized attachments. Uh, but I think in the research and clinically, professionally, it often gets ignored.
Yeah, absolutely. And um, and many of those listening now will have the same, kind of the same understanding where they've had to uh, come to these services because only these services are brave enough to do that exploration. Um, People of faith and people of no faith together coming for this. Um, so what I also wanted to discuss was perhaps because you said you work with children, you kind of made like you said the books are very easy to follow and the chapters are not long at all, and then they have a direct reflection at the end, or something to think about, or some of them are just tick boxes to kind of see what what influences have created that addiction or that attachment, and so on. Um, I'm just curious, was that based on maybe feedback from, because I know you've done Adventure in Manhood, you've done these programs where you've actually working with youth, or you're working with boys. And I wondered if some of that knowledge has influenced the way you've written the workbook.
Yes, for sure. So I'll just tell you, Ali, before I had published the workbook, I had been working with hundreds of youth already. And so I had worksheets and I would teach them something in the office and then give them a worksheet so they could follow up at home. And and of course, over the course of years, the youth would tell me, well, I didn't understand this or I didn't. And so I would sort of adjust those worksheets. And sometimes, because especially the younger teenagers, it was easier for them to check a box than it was to actually write something out. Or other times they're young, if they're young, they don't always know, and they'll think, well, I'm not sure. And so having a checklist of items gives them some options to start to think about, oh, yes, this or that or whatever. And so, yes, over the years, I took all those worksheets that I had produced, and that's what you're seeing in the book is really a compilation of all the worksheets I was using with youth and adults as well. Um, so I've simplified it a little bit for the book so that younger adolescents or teenagers can understand it. but these are also worksheets I was using with adult men as well.
Yeah, and you see they're very simple, and anybody who's worked with youth know when you're doing therapy, a lot of it is a language barrier. They don't know how to speak, and you have to use different methods because there is that a prerequisite for counseling is I can communicate, and a lot of clients cannot communicate their feelings in a clear way. So that's definitely there.
Yeah.
Um, in in terms of the um the tools, and one of the ones which I really, really like is um the four areas of healing. Can you tell me how you came up with that concept of um the check-in, and then you have the four areas of healing, and where that comes about from?
Yes, sure, I can. Um, I don't know how many of, I'm guessing most of your participants on the webinar have not read the book or they don't know. So maybe
Uh-huh.
let me first
Oh,
describe.
absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah. So if I think if we took a minute, it would help me to answer your question if I
Absolutely.
first describe for you what are sexualized attachments. And
Yes.
if there are some men who have been in recovery or who have experienced unwanted same-sex attractions or gender confusion, some of this might be very familiar to you already. But sexualized attachments is an issue that's been in the research for many decades. And it's essentially when when you discover that there's been emotional issues, emotional needs, wounds, in this case, attachment wounds or attachment needs that get fused with sexuality. And so, for example, if I have this longing for attachment with the other boys. I want to fit in with the other boys. I want to belong. I want to fit in. I want to be one of the guys. And that longing to connect, the longing for attachment, if you fuse sexuality into the picture, what was once just a legitimate longing to belong to the world of boys, to fit in, to have a best friend, to have buddies, now becomes a sexual feeling. The sexual urges you have, your sexuality, the direction it moves towards is sexual intimacy. So human intimacy, that's just biological. Your attachment drives have the same direction, but it's emotional and psychological. So my attachment drive moves me toward connection with other men, boys, women, people in my life. So attachment is connection psychologically, and sexuality is connection sexually, intimately. So they're moving the same direction. It's easy for them then to get fused together. So, well, maybe a young boy is has a natural, legitimate longing to bond with a father figure. Every boy wants a dad, and he wants to be guided and mentored and helped along the way. If you have an adult father figure, whether it's your own father or a coach or somebody in the community or an extended family member who steps into that role and then maybe takes advantage of that role, hijack your legitimate needs for a mentor by sexualizing the contact. Now that attachment drive towards connecting with a father figure or a mentor becomes a sexual feeling or a sexual memory. Now you've introduced sexuality into the picture, the longing for mentoring and mentorship gets sexualized. So you have these sexualized emotional issues. And there's about 12 different factors of ways you could sexualize that or sexualize different kinds of emotional issues, wounds, attachment deficits, and things that get sexualized. Emotions related to attachment drives can get sexualized. So envy, you can have eroticized envy. You can have anger. That if you are angry, it could start to get sexualized. In the BDSM community, you often see fear that gets sexualized. So heightened emotional states can all become fused with sexual energy, and that's what we're talking about. And so the book kind of goes through chapter by chapter. Okay, here's one topic, here's one issue that could get sexualized and be confusing. Here's another issue that could get sexualized and make you confused. And so it sort of goes through chapter by chapter, and that's what it's about there. So back to your question, these 4 areas, I would often ask my more advanced clients as they're doing well in recovery, how are they doing in those 4 areas? And one of them is mentorship. How are you doing in your relationship to same-sex mentors, father figures, coaches? Are you connecting? Because every man needs a mentor. And if you're finding that in your life, if you're not, you need to find it. How do you get that? It's a natural, instinctual drive to have mentors in your life. So not having that is going to be a deficit for your developmental progress and your health. The other area in there is like buddies, friendships, companionships, friends. How are you doing in your same-sex friendships? Are you connecting in those kinds of ways? Are you getting the emotional bonding and the connection you need there? And if you're not, that's another deficit that could create problems. The other area in there is in terms of masculinity, how you're doing in terms of feeling like a boy, feeling strong. How are you adapting to the world of men? And this doesn't mean that you might not have some attributes or qualities or interests in feminine things. That's totally fine. But are you feeling confident in yourself as a man, in your sense of masculinity? And so addressing some of that in areas that are uncomfortable and trying to fix that, almost as though you're trying to bond into the world of men, is another area. And then finally, areas related to your body. So things like physical affection, when you are wanting to be affectionate or you need a hug. Sometimes not having that or having those needs for affection abused creates all kind of confusion. If you're abused, now suddenly any kind of affection or touch feels wrong, feels sexual, feels you're afraid. Or on the other hand, you never get any kind of affection, and now you're starved for it. And so whenever you're hungry for connection or touch, for something physical, you start to sexualize it because you're so hungry for it. You never get it. So those are 4 areas I'll often check in with. When men are getting those 4 areas satisfied in terms of their maintenance in their recovery, then they do really well. And the other aspect of all of that, Ali, maybe that's important to consider, and there might be some language differences here. I don't know with Arabic, but I know certainly the book just got published into German and Polish. In English, we use the words healing and recovery to separate 2 different distinct aspects of what's going on. The healing aspect, that you're going to address and resolve the emotional underlying issues, trauma, abuse, father hunger, lack of mentoring, all those kinds of things, being bullied, those all need to be addressed in a healing capacity, a resolution capacity. Maybe resolution is a better word to use in other languages. Recovery really refers a little bit more to the addictive piece, the compulsive piece. So when you have these kinds of wounds, it is not uncommon that you might start compulsively masturbating or compulsively fantasizing or compulsively acting out with other men or with pornography. And so there's a recovery aspect. And in the US, we would talk about it in terms of addiction. How do you overcome some of those problems? Because when you're engaging in those behaviors, you are reinforcing the thoughts, feelings, behaviors, urges that you're trying to move away from. So you have to do the healing work, but you also have to do recovery work and get sober and stop acting out and stop doing those things. And those are 2 pieces of recovery that are separate but very important to do at the same time. And again, other languages have different ways of describing that. I know in Polish and in German, you just can't use that word healing because it means something different. But nonetheless, you would still have a component there in doing your personal work of learning how to resolve emotional, undercurring, emotional things, and then stop certain compulsive things so that you can get to where you want to be. And it doesn't matter what religion you are, whether you're Muslim or Christian or Orthodox or atheist. There'll be two components to getting better.
Mhm. And that's so true, especially earlier on in the journey. Clients need a sense self-awareness. Like a lot of people say, what do you get out of this? And we say, well, you got a lot of self-awareness. Well, what does that self-awareness mean? It means that I'm aware of the trauma. I'm aware of the things which I need healing for. I need acknowledging that actually things happened which weren't quite right. And a lot of men go through these experiences and they brave themselves through these experiences because there's been painful experiences, but they've never discussed these experiences. They've never reflected on these experiences. They've never had the time to sit back and look at how those experiences shape them, and just sitting and discussing them alone is therapeutic because they've not had that opportunity to talk about those experiences with
Yeah.
anyone. And that part is so important uh,
Yes.
before jumping into the latter part, which is,
Yes.
uh, when it becomes more behavioral, it's an addiction, so I need to treat it behaviorally. And I've not really understood the uh, I'm not really aware why I'm compulsively masturbating,
Hmm.
but I
Hmm.
I know that. And the other thing which I really like that you um, clarified the meaning of attachments is a lot of times men come and they'll say, um, I don't think I have the traditional SSA. A lot of people will say, I don't think I have that. I have this type of attachment to this particular thing. Or,
Hmm.
I like these type of men, or I like like you said, the BDSM community or the
Hmm.
kinks, where it's a very specific attribute about a man or what that represents to them that becomes sexualized. And
Hmm. Hmm.
um, the reality is that they're all sexualized attachments. Because when we've
Hmm.
come to this world of identity, what that world of identity does is um, it makes a caricature of one sexualized attachment, and it says this is now an identity. And other
Yes.
people who have either power has become an attachment, or
Hmm.
the uh, father wound
Hmm.
is an attachment, or people who um, never really had good skills, social skills, and they really wanted a friendship, but they never got anyone, and it became uh, some clients have come in with a romanticized attachment and not a sexualized attachment at all. They're like, I'm not sexually attracted to men, but I'm romantically attached to men, for example. And then you see um, the complexity, if you like, of these attachments, respective to the uniqueness of the client,
Hmm.
and how that is crudely understood by an identity. Okay, we give you a sexual orientation or we give you a sexual identity, and it's a crude oversimplification of something where an attachment has happened due to an emotional need, which, like you said, was there for connection, and it got fused with a sexual need, which was also there for connection. And there's a
Hmm.
very thin boundary between an emotional and a sexual connection.
Yes. Yeah. I think understanding what you're experiencing is very important. And, before I would say 25 years ago when I started some of this work, um, not having, I don't think, a complete picture of everything. I was still seeing and learning and reading, and but I would have men who would come in and they would tell me, I know this is not who I am. Or for example, I know these feelings started after the abuse, for
Mhm.
example. And so can we please address that? And some of those early testimonials were very helpful to me to understand, okay, A plus B is C. Like this is more and more obvious. But culture has turned things into an identification piece. And I just do not know that that's accurate or descriptive. If someone has a same-sex attraction, if it's due to a sexualized attachment issue, it's a symptom of the sexualized attachment. It's something they're experiencing. It's not who they are. And so if you understand that, then you can really get to what's really going on and start to understand, okay, here's the symptom, what's underneath it. If you go to a doctor and you have a fever, you might address the fever, but the doctor's going to want to know what's causing the fever. And I'm not saying that what the men are experiencing is a disease. I'm not saying that, but just to use an analogy, the symptom is not necessarily indicative of the cause itself. So if I'm sneezing, it doesn't mean I have to take medication for sneezing. I probably have a cold. And so if somebody has these confusions about their gender, about sexuality, same-sex attractions, bisexuality, things like that, or other variation, it's most likely a symptom, not an inherent identity. Dr. Lisa Diamond is a gay advocate. She's a psychotherapist, a psychologist. She's been very active in the field for years. And probably 5 or 6 years ago, she just came right out at an LGBTQ conference where she was speaking and said, please, everyone, stop saying this is genetic. She says, we have not found a gene in 50 years. There is no gene. There's a variety of factors that would cause this, and it doesn't matter why. And and I agree with what she's saying. There is no genetic fact. We've never found a genetic cause. There's no genetic markers. They always want to think there is and try and find one, but they haven't found one, and there isn't one. Where I disagree with Dr. Diamond is that I think it does matter why somebody has these feelings and attractions. Because if it's trauma based, if it's a trauma reenactment or a trauma bond or things like that going on, I think that's really important to help resolve and find healing in your life for some of those things. Even if you decided to live a gay lifestyle, if you have unresolved trauma repetition going on because you were abused, well, I don't think you're going to be happy. Even in the gay lifestyle, yeah, and it may feel satisfying in the beginning, and you may get some sexual satisfaction. You may even feel somehow accepted, but I don't know that long term that resolves trauma. Um, I do think as well, I've struggled a bit working with clients when religion becomes their main source, their main resource. And so they're suddenly now, after some time, feeling a deep level of shame that they prayed harder, they read their scriptures more, and it didn't go away, or whatever their church leader told them, and it just didn't help. And now they're in a spiritual crisis, questioning everything, uh, rather than considering, okay, what's underneath all this? What does God want me to learn about who I am and why I might have these feelings? So instead of feeling like, well, God hates fags, maybe consider God is trying to tell you that there's something else going on, that that's not who you are. But the feelings can be very real, and so they're it's confusing for sure. But I think we have to really hold strong to discover ourselves to see what's going on underneath.
I really like you mentioned the work of Dr. Lisa Diamond, because when we look at this work, we look at this work from a gay affirmative approach. They're using the exact same methods of this work, and they're discovering in their clients that they have these attachments, they have these sexualized attachments. They're talking about BDSM, they're talking about kinks, and you read this in their work, and the only difference between those two therapists is that the client has a different set of values, but the therapeutic technique is exactly the same. It's explorative. They're, they come from a different social construct,
Hmm.
perhaps,
Hmm.
but the
Hmm.
exploration is absolutely the same. And like you're saying, you could still be in a gay relationship, but you want to know, why am I so hooked, or why am I so attached to men who are like this? What
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
behind the picture? Can I go deeper into that? And a lot of men, a lot of men who are, and a lot of LGBTQ people who identify as that, have the therapy, they're going through similar work, and it comes back to the client, where the client says, my value system means that I have the attraction, but I choose to live my life in a certain way. It
Hmm.
isn't this notion that, oh, I'm just going to get 100% rid of the attractions, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think that's the confusion we have a
Hmm.
lot with the LGBTQ, which look at this work and say, oh, you're trying to change the attraction. No, we're not trying to change the attraction. We're trying to see where the client values are, what
Yes.
the issue they're presenting, and what
Yes.
awareness is coming out from that. And
Yes.
I've done work with clients who are identify as LGBTQ, and they come up with the same awareness to say, yes, this is from childhood. Yes, this is an attachment. Yes, we understand this, but because of our personal choice, we we choose to go on this path, right?
Right. Right. And that's important to respect that person's choice. And religiously, many may have opposing moral perspectives on that. Um, I will tell you, just to address this basically, because I've spent several years as a sex therapist working with couples when attractions diminish or change over the lifespan, that sort of thing. Orientation and attractions can change, and we've seen that, but it's not the way people think, and it's not what the gay community expects. And sometimes clients come in and they expect there's some magic to it. uh, but if you consider however many years one might have spent memorizing a certain attraction. So if you are maybe you have a problem with pornography, it's a sexualized attachment issue you have for certain things or a fetish or men, and you start looking at pornography, and you've done that for how many years? You've memorized it. So it sinks into the mind. It's almost embeds itself, imprints itself. And the longer you do it, the more deeply it's imprinted. So the only way to, you can't magically change that imprinting. You have to let it atrophy. And that takes time. And the only way for that attraction to atrophy is to stop engaging it. So I have to stop looking at men, or masturbating, or looking at pornography, or acting out, or what. I have to stop all those things and then address my emotional issues, or those will pull back in that direction. And then I have to move into a new place, much like a 12 or a 13-year-old boy, where I learn how to date girls, and I learn what it's like to interact with them, and I learn to be romantic with them. In the beginning, most 11, 12, 13-year-old boys, that's something they have to actually think about. They have to start thinking about it. They have to, over time, sort of memorize and go that direction, and then the urges move with them in normal, healthy situations. A man who has struggled with these kinds of wounds will have to allow the old attractions to atrophy while he develops and grows the new ones, develops the new ones. And we have some really good research. Dr. Monica Bro has done quite a bit of good research at the Arizona State University about sexual appetite development. And she does some referencing to a study that they did on on men in prison. And I know it's a little graphic, but they what they did was take men and they had them masturbate to a set of tires. So they were like car tires and something of that sort. And they did that every day with them. And after 60 days, they went back in with those men, and all they had to do was bring the tires into the room, and the men are already getting aroused, having an erection. And again, I know it's a little bit graphic, but the point that the researchers were making is that you can train your body to respond to a lot of stimulus, a lot of different kinds of things. And again, it's a very abrupt sort of example, but we know that sexual feelings and urges can be fluid. And what you do and how you reinforce them and what you're aroused to is often dependent on your emotions and what you've been reinforcing and how to do that. Many of my clients have not been interested in trying to develop new attractions to women. Some of my clients, as they've gone through the recovery process and the resolution process, they've sort of experienced a new sort of asexual, neutral position where they don't really have a lot of attractions, and they're very happy in that choice. And then I've had other men who still from time to time the feelings will come back and they are constantly pushing against that, but they don't want to do any more therapy, and that's fine too. You know, you have to do what you choose and where you want to go. But for those who want, you can develop those attractions. But you have to remember it's a matter of allowing the old ones to be forgotten and atrophied and allowing new ones to develop over time, and you have to specifically engage that. You have to put yourself out there to learn how to date and interact romantically with the opposite sex, and that takes time and practice and whatever, and maybe with a therapist. So I just wanted to address that briefly.
Absolutely. And I love that you use the term reinforcers. There's so many reinforcers in our society which keep us reinforced in one narrative, right? Whether it's religion, whether it's liberalism, whatever it is, there's a reinforcer that says, no, this is who you are. You can't change. You belong in that box. And actually, it's like you said, going back to being 12 or 13. And a lot of clients say, can I do that? Can I go back? Can I? And yes, you can go back to a certain extent because uh, you're relearning, like a lot of clients would come in and say, well, I've never done this. Well, everyone's a beginner, right? Everyone's a beginner at something. You can start somewhere. And we have people who have not had any therapeutic intervention and their are attractions have changed. I mean,
Yes.
even if you would talk to people who've not struggled with their sexuality, they'll tell you that the attractions they have now isn't the attractions they had 10,
Mm-hmm.
15 years ago. So
Yes.
it
Yes.
it is a natural process.
Yeah.
And if you have somebody who's willing to walk with you in that process to, you know, uh, help you in that, I really can't see how, that is um, problematic, because
Mm-hmm.
like I said, it's client led at the end of the day. So
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
you're still in that frame of reference. You're helping them reach that goal. And different people, like you said, have may have a different view of what's a, a good endpoint, and it isn't this binary reality where we say no, it's either one or the other, and it's that kind of looking at it as more of a fluid piece,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
rather than when I was young, somebody told me I'm this, so I'll be this, or society told me I'm
Mm-hmm.
this,
Mm-hmm.
religion or whatever reinforcer that was
Mm-hmm.
put in to say I am this,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
how when we grow older we kind of we grow awareness to say, oh, okay, no, that isn't just because I've had reinforcement in that area doesn't mean that's who I am
Yes.
or I'm limited to.
I
Uh,
totally agree. I actually have one chapter in the book, Ollie, where I've talked about misperceptions, because one reinforcer that I think is important to acknowledge is labels, either
Mhm.
labels that are given to the child or labels that we take on ourselves because we're confused. And some of the cultures that have become so outrageously sexualized in unhealthy ways, I think will label kids or cause the kids to label themselves in ways that cause more confusion. So for example, I remember working with a young man. He was about 14 years old going into high school. So over here, that would be about 14 years old. That's the last 4 years of basic school in the US. And he was in tears, upset with me because he was gay. And I was trying to understand and asking him, tell me why you think you're gay. And because I'm not hearing anything that would be normal in what he's describing, uh, that someone would normally say if they were gay. And so then he described for me his first week at school, brand new school, the youngest in the school, 14 years old. He sees his friends in the hallway and some of his buddies from junior school. And so they're seeing each other in the hallway and hey, and greeting each other and giving each other a hug. And some of the older boys on the side of the hall started teasing the boys, teasing them that they're gay. You hugging each other. Do you know that gay people do that? That must mean you're gay. And here he is sitting in my office telling me, I like hugging people. I like hugging other boys. I guess I'm gay. So the label was so utterly confusing to him. And so we had a fantastic session where I described to him that all boys like hugging each other. It's not necessarily a sexual thing. It's okay. And we even looked at some examples together of men on the soccer field who would hug each other or even smack each other affectionately, and it wasn't a gay thing. Or on the baseball field here, baseball's quite popular, and how the boys would, somebody wins and they're all hugging each other. It's just one big hug, and that's okay. That's natural. That doesn't necessarily reflect a sexual urge. And so some of these labels are very dangerous. They harm, they hurt. And now this young boy, without some intervention there quickly, he might have gone on to perceive himself as gay and move in different directions because of that label. I know that there's been a lot of frustration in the EU and other places over some countries, like I know Poland and Hungary and some others, who have outlawed, Russia has outlawed the LGBTQ curriculum in any of their schools and whatnot, because they don't want those labels coming in to confuse the kids. And on that regard, I totally understand that. I can see it's a harmful message. Uh, so I think that's an important point to make too. And some of your listeners on this webinar and others out there may have sometimes been confused because a label was thrust on them and they didn't know how to deal with that, things they were called in school or things that were done to them, and it created a label. I've had young men, teenage boys, and adult college young men who were sexually assaulted. And there was an aspect of that that confused them, not just because it happened to them, but because there was a part of it that physically felt good and it was confusing. And why did my body do that? Why did my body respond to that? Because I didn't like that. And that's confusing. And then they self perpetuate this label. That must mean I like men, or I like being raped, or I like being gay, or something. Totally false narrative. But a kid doesn't know what to do with that if he doesn't have anybody to tell and talk to. You mentioned earlier how important that talking piece is. And I want to reinforce that that is not only important, but I think it's critical if you want long-term success in overcoming this and getting better, because there's an attachment piece there. When I get vulnerable and I tell you, Ollie, I've had all these deep struggles, I am so ashamed of myself. I'm now attaching, I'm connecting with you. And for those who have struggled with these issues, there's a lack of attachment or attachment deficits or attachment wounds. So feeling safe with another person, another man, to tell him, this is my shame, is an attachment piece you may have been desperately needing. You've been hungry for that. So it starts the healing process talking about it.
Absolutely. That said so well. Um, and yes, I will, and I see the audience are engaging, so I will uh, start taking questions. There is a question here which says, I've been exploring my issues with my father and peers and initially believed my sexual encounters with men were linked to those wounds. Now I recognize they serve as a way to avoid relationships with women whom I associate with feelings of incest, particularly as I work on my feminine and maternal issues. How can I move beyond this phase? Is it common for clients later in therapy to realize their same-sex attractions may be more about avoiding women than being attached to their male
Yes,
wounds?
that's a really good question. Uh, so one of the factors that is very common for same-sex attraction is having walls and blocks up with women. And so it's not just about men and abuse and things like that. Women do play into it. Sometimes your wounds with women don't show up, or at least you don't see them until after you've done some work around the men with father issues, with peer bonding. And then as you feel comfortable there, you start to realize I'm avoiding women. I've got blocks up with women. And I like Dr. Jeff Robinson's work around some of that because he talks about perfectionism, he talks about blocks, he talks about walls. And so, on some level, that will be your new chapter of recovery work. I need to work on some of this now. How do I resolve some of that incestual feeling that happens there because my walls go up? And so how do you bring your walls down and learn how to interact with the woman? The woman, this participant talked about the incestual feminine maternal issues. The woman that will be right for you if you choose to engage heterosexually with a woman romantically, the woman who will be right in that relationship will be one who can hear those wounds from you. In other words, I'm going to, in the dating process, at some point tell her, I've often been afraid of women. I've often avoided women because whatever my mom or this situation happened, or the incestual emotional smothering of my aunt or whatever, and be able to talk to her about that. And so as I'm dating you, it would be important for me to feel like maybe I can say no, that I can step back, whatever you need to be able to work in the relationship with her, and for her to be able to hear that and to honor that and to be able to strengthen that and say, I totally understand. And when you need me to, tell me, I'll step back so it doesn't feel incestuous, so it doesn't, and you work together. That's part of a good romantic relationship. We work together on our wounds, and she'll have wounds too. And so she may come from a family where her wounds show up in a relationship with you, and yours show up in relationship to her. And so part of the dating process in any normal relationship is to figure out what triggers me, what triggers you, and how to work through that. But ultimately, just to summarize all of that, I like this question a lot because it often doesn't get addressed enough in the world of recovery. You probably do have blocks and walls around women or fears that create, an inability to go, and you just have to work through that. And it's usually a little bit more advanced in recovery that you get to some of that, but nonetheless, it's absolutely legitimate. What he's feeling is absolutely legitimate. It just takes some time to go there to address it.
It's so true. We often focus on homo emotional wounds, not hetero emotional wounds, and but clients sometimes think that, oh, I can never heal from the male woundedness, and they never push themselves to work on the female bit because
Right.
that's
Yeah. Yeah.
as much as important. And I love how he says avoidance, where
Mhm.
sometimes we look at it as disinterest, but maybe it is avoidance. So
Mhm.
thank
Mhm.
you.
Yes. Mm.
Thank you for that. Next question. What does healing look like for someone who experienced childhood abuse and developed an addiction to same-sex pornography, particularly in terms of reclaiming a healthy sense of identity, overcoming shame, and building authentic relationships? So it's interesting he's used the word healing as we were talking earlier about difference between healing
Mm,
and recovery.
recovery. Yes. Is the uh, is the word in Arabic for healing congruent with what we're talking about?
Yes, I think, yeah, I think the only contention people sometimes have with healing is the perception that the attractions will just completely go. And then we say, no, that's not what healing looks like. Healing
Right.
looks like, it's a bit like saying, I want the trauma to go away.
Hmm.
Trauma is already going to be there, but it's giving a different perspective, a different understanding, a different integration of
Hmm.
how it comes. So I think
Gotcha.
that's the only, contention where sometimes people look at that term heal and they think eliminate, for
Maybe
example.
magic, perhaps.
Magic, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yes.
I'm looking at Umar's question there, and there's several different pieces to it. What does healing look like for someone who experienced abuse? There's going to be a need to address the trauma of the abuse. And depending on how complex that is, sometimes we would talk about complex trauma that might in layers. For example, I have a very close friend he's from Damascus. He grew up in a neighborhood where there was a lot of abuse that happened to him. And so it wasn't just one event. It was one event, then the next event, then the next event, then growing up all his life. And so working through that with someone who's experienced to help you get through that trauma and unpeel it layer upon layer and not just resolve the trauma, but part of that work is also realizing what message did I get from that trauma? So if you were a young boy who was accosted by a neighbor and raped, what kind of messages are you getting? You might have got a message about I'm not strong enough, or I must be gay, and so all these messages, in addition to the trauma itself, have to be resolved. And then he mentions developing an addiction to same-sex pornography. I would encourage you to think, Umar, about the pornography itself is the addiction. It doesn't matter whether it's same sex or anything else. It's pornography. It's a form of sexual addiction. So getting away from any form of pornography is going to be key in part of your recovery. It's like a sex addict. If you ever went to a Sex Addicts Anonymous group, the men in the room, there might be 20 men in the circle, and some have pornography, some have acted out with prostitutes, females, some have acted out with guys. It's like a whole room full of all type compulsive masturbation. So sexual addiction is sexual addiction. The fact that it's same-sex pornography tells me that many of your wounds or deficits revolve around same-sex relationships and broken intimacy and attachment wounds. So that's about that. Reclaiming healthy sense of identity. I think that comes through the recovery process and also connecting with healthy men. When we have healthy men around us who know our shame and have seen us, metaphorically, maybe seen us naked, you've seen all the ugly parts, you've seen everything about me, and you still like me, that really helps to develop a confidence in my identity about who I am, which in turn, then, to the next part of your question, helps you to overcome shame. Shame thrives in an atmosphere of secrecy and hiding. So the more hiding there is, the more secrecy there is, the easier it is to feel that shame. Shame grows like a mushroom in the dark. And so the more you hide, the more shame there is, the harder it is. And building authentic relationships, as you mentioned, that's really a huge part of all of the aspects of healing and recovery. I need authentic relationships wherever I can find them to help me in my healing work and then also in my addiction compulsive recovery work. I need accountability partners. I need mentors. I need buddies. I need friends. And how you do that? Well, every culture is a little different. You know, you have to find places. Here in the U.S., a lot of the churches in the area where I live, there's a lot of support networks for men where you can go and join a men's group. There's also support groups for specific problems you can join through therapy offices or coaching offices where they work on masculinity issues or just camaraderie issues. And so finding those places, I don't know where you live, Umar, but I would encourage you to find places within your community where you can find some of that. Some churches, some synagogues, it will be more difficult because some people are so religious, they're afraid to be more honest about what's going on in their lives. And I say that you have to be. I'm not saying I'm very faith myself. I think faith is very important, but I just know, having been to a lot of different churches and places, that some people will be very superficial. And so you have to find the people. Don't be discouraged about your church or synagogue. That's okay. People are who they are, but keep looking until you can find those authentic relationships wherever they might be. And sometimes that's international. I know Brothers Road does some great stuff. I know Discovery Identity does some great stuff. And these are international organizations that can help you find community there too.
Thank you. Yes. Next question. How linear is the healing process? Can I start addressing my opposite sex wounds before I'm done with my same-sex wounds? Can I start dating women while I'm still having same-sex attractions?
Fantastic questions. Yes. Well, let me start with the first line there. It's not linear. I'm sorry. It's not linear. The healing process takes time. There's about 12 different issues I usually like to figure out with the clients and kind of go through, and the book outlines some of that. But my experience has been that you'll bounce around like a ping pong ball. You might first discover that you have a lot of father wounds, or maybe the abuse is right there at the top. You can identify that. And then suddenly now, a month later, you've done some healing around that. And now you're working on the women's issues. And so if you can start addressing opposite sex wounds, because those are coming up and you can identify them, you can see them, absolutely. I don't think there's any reason why I think you should work on the issues that are most coming up for you at the time. And can you start dating women? Yes. Yes. But I would put yourself in a situation, like see yourself, if you're starting to date, as though you were learning like you were a teenager. Don't expect that you're going to be obsessed with having sex with her that night. I would be dating her like a regular teenager would and be thinking, you're trying to get to know her and you're trying to understand what it's like to date and you're wanting to be in a romantic relationship. Don't make it about the attraction, make it about her and getting to know her and learning how to date. And so, yes, absolutely, you can. I think in the dating process, you will probably find other walls or other fears that come up in that process. So at some point, it is going to be important to date anyway, because you've got to discover what else is under there.
Absolutely. Said so well. Haroon is asking, I long for a partnership and can also very well imagine it with a woman. But whenever I'm confronted with the decision of partnership with a woman, I have one big hesitation. I feel like the woman deserves a man that genuinely desires her and makes her feel wanted in all aspects. And I think that deep down, women do sense when the specific innate masculine energy inside is missing. I would feel awful to silently deprive someone of that innate feeling, but still I long for a healthy, emotionally intimate partnership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like Haroon's question there. I will say two things. You're making a big stereotypical judgment about what women want when you say that. And I think you need to be very careful. There are many women who might enjoy sex, but uh, many who that's not the first objective they have in a relationship. I would say most women, that is not their primary desire in a relationship. Most women are looking for dating. They want to feel safe. They do want to feel your masculine energy to keep them safe. They want to feel nurtured. They want to feel cherished. And sex for women usually comes after all that happens. And I have worked with couples doing marriage counseling over the years. And I've worked with some couples where the woman is never really interested in the sexual aspect of the relationship. She's more interested in the coupleship, the partnership, the marriage. And sometimes she'll have sex because he wants to, but it's not always important to her. So be careful that you don't stereotype too much there, because every woman varies a little bit. In terms of your own masculinity, I definitely think that's important. What you're describing to me feels like you're concerned about your masculinity and that you won't show up in a masculine way and feel strong for her. So that's you. And I would say, yes, you definitely need to work on that. You do want to feel confident and strong. You want to feel like a man. You want to feel masculine. And however that would be expressed for you, I would focus on that.
Absolutely. And, I like this question as well because it kind of a lot of men would, even men who are married, might feel, am I an imposter in this relationship because I don't, have the maybe the rigor of the sexual attraction that maybe somebody who doesn't struggle with same-sex attraction have. And I believe this is perpetuated by this reinforcement of sexual identities. This is heterosexual, this is homosexual, and this uh, perpetuation of the sexual identity makes sex the only aspect in a relationship, and men
Yeah.
forget the friendship,
Companionship.
the
Mhm.
love, the relationship, the shared values. I mean,
Mhm. Mhm.
how many
Mhm.
words can I give to what constitutes a loving relationship? And sex is a part of it, but it isn't. And we're not even talking about sex here. We're talking about sexual interests. We're talking about sexual preference.
Mhm.
So it's not even the sex, it's the perception of the sexual preference. And sometimes when we have that one issue, we think that, oh, this is the biggest issue, and um, we don't look at our capacity as a human to love someone, to have a friendship with someone, to have a relationship with someone, and how those values. I mean, if we were to take it the other way around, if you knew that your spouse didn't find you the most sexiest man alive, I think most men would still live with that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and the reality, Ollie, that men say in their 50s, 60s, at some point have they never not been attracted to their spouse? She's gained some weight
yeah,
or things, there's been some injury or and so attractions do tend to ebb and flow, and that's pretty normal and that's pretty natural. And there are workshops that you can attend here in the US where older couples are working to reignite their attraction to one another or to um, uh, tr try and encourage that again. Maybe a man will have an affair because he says he's no longer interested or attracted to his wife. Well, that's just another attraction too. So how do you learn to be attracted to who you've chosen and learn to be okay with that? That is a normal process. And I don't know that back in the 1700s, 1800s, people weren't having this conversation. They were just expecting that you chose your partner and you stayed with them. And it didn't matter how she looked or he looked in 40, 30 years. you had made your choice and you learned how to keep that attraction going or develop that traction or redevelop that over time. Um, Age always impacts attractions in couples who don't have these issues. Sometimes, a man can veer off course just because he's now losing interest. So sexuality is fluid and it moves, and you have to sort of leave yourself committed to the direction and and stay committed to that. And that's just a part of being human.
Absolutely. Um, I also wanted to that you said it so beautifully in terms of um, allowing what this work really does is it frees you to say, I can explore, let's explore something different. And people have different capacity of fluidity. But even if people don't get the fluidity or they don't experience the fluidity, with this work, you still get a wealth of understanding of the tools which I need to experience healthy connection, because at
Yeah.
the end of the day, the the need behind the attraction was the healthy connection, you
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
And if I understand how I can get that, then a lot of the issue is resolved. I may still have the attraction, but I understand that that is the real need. And then it it becomes very hard from that point to then go back to that sexual identity because you're realizing, oh, behind it, there's a connection need, And I think when most clients, when they've gone past that point, it's very difficult. They might say, oh, I slipped up, I acted out, but it isn't where they're choosing between the two paths. Like when you have a client who's unsure, like, is this the journey I want to go into? Is this
Hmm.
even possible? I think most clients, when they've gone past that point of um, understanding that uh, it's an emotional connection, then it becomes very, very clear. And one of the things that I uh, I wanted to talk about was, you have the tool as the barometer where
Mm.
you say um, what how many um, how these things build up, right? So
Hmm.
it isn't
Yeah.
something which is one thing which then builds up. There's several things which make up that preoccupation. And um, when we put all these things down, it allows us to see it's not one single thing which is causing me to feel detached from other men, because a lot of the times we're men and we like to be very logical. We like to be very succinct. Oh, this was why I detached from masculinity. But what we realize is it's multi-layered. There are many different issues which have raised up the barometer to that point where we've completely detached. And that's why the word trauma is so relevant,
Mm.
because it isn't a single activity. There's multiple issues which which have effectively caused somebody to detach from their own sex.
Hmm. Hmm.
It is something which is, and that's what I kind of learned in my work, that it wasn't this happened, so this happened. It was layers of stuff, which meant that I said, this is unsafe. I'm going to move away from it. I'm going to move to the feminine that seems more safer. It seems better. It seems, and when I try and go back to masculinity, then I need to peel away those layers which I thought were hurtful or they were not me, and really understand that. So I like the barometer where you're kind of putting the different issues which are raising, you know, also in a sense of if my masculinity tank is low, if my connection tank is low, it's because I'm not, there's a lot of things which are building up where I'm not getting the connection or I'm completely detached from men.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, I want to check up on time if it's okay to ask a few more questions because I know we we said we'd finish soon.
Yeah, I've got I probably need to leave here in about 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay. So we'll take one more question. So is it possible for recording? Yes. So we will have, you can find us on our YouTube channel. As I say, people who are unable to attend. Um, there's another question which is saying, thank you for a useful discussion from Ashraf. What about men who, at the age of 70 and having diabetes and its issues, and still, I'm not sure what that is, still having sex while he can't be very active and he acts abusive way for having sex? I'm not sure whether that's
Mm.
uh, term correctly, but I think what the question is asking is someone who is older age, and there's a sense of abuse maybe when performing that. Not 100% sure what that question is saying. Uh,
Yeah. If he wants to retype that, he could.
yeah,
I will say that with diabetes, that excuse me, diabetes can have an interaction that will make it difficult for you sexually in your sexual functioning. So if you're talking about having erections or your libido, yes, diabetes will impact that, and you will at some point want to address that with a doctor, uh, and talk to him about sexual function in that way. And that's a very specialized issue that not everyone deals with, of course, because not everyone has diabetes. So you for sure want to talk to a doctor about some of that. Um, if you're the one who's acting abusive when you're having sex, if that's what you're talking about, there's going to be an underlying emotional reason as to why. And you really need to talk to someone and try and figure out why. What is it underneath emotionally that causes you to want to be abusive? In some cases, that would be a trauma repetition. So perhaps someone abused you and it was traumatic for you, and your sort of subconscious is reiterating that abusive relationship, and it's coming out onto other people. It could be that. It could be that you have some anger unresolved, some rage unresolved, and that's coming out abusively. I've also worked with some clients where um, they had such a lack of control in their life growing up that now when they're older, they're lashing out as a way of getting control back. Like they just have never felt control. So there could be a variety of issues there. And I would encourage you to get with a counselor of some sorts and try and see what that might be about. That would be my suggestion from what I understand on your question. He acts abusive. He wrote down here he acts abusive towards his wife. So yes. So back to your question there, Ashraf, I would say you've got to uncover what the underlying emotional issues are that may be perpetuating your abusive behavior. And I would guess that there are probably some undercurrents of your own anger, of rage, some need you have to be in control. I don't know for sure what those would be. You'll have to parse that out with someone, and get a counselor or a coach and start journaling through some of that and figure some of that out. But that's coming from you for sure.
thank you. Final question on, you mentioned Jeff Robinson's work. Is there a specific resource or someone's
Hmm.
wondering what that was?
Yes, Jeff Robinson, he's a quiet therapist because he doesn't like attention. And he works out of Provo, Utah, and he has, I might be wrong, he might not be there anymore. But I tell you, he had a website called let me look it up so I get it right. He has what he says, I think it's 7 blocks to developing heterosexuality. Let me look it up here real quick. And let's see. I don't see it. I'll have to look it up, Ollie, and I can send that to you another
Yeah,
time.
sure, and I can pass it on. Well, thank I'd like to thank Dr. Godfrey for his time, and I really encourage people to get hold of this workbook. It is the thing I like about it is you can pick the chapter you want. You could just go straight into it. It's a bit like that. I'm a bit like that. I just go to the parts which I like and use it. And the questions are, even like the audience is quite wide in terms of it could be someone who's quite young to even adults who are using this. So it's a really good, fantastic resource, and especially for people maybe who I know sometimes people say I can't afford therapy or I can't afford
Mm.
and the workbooks like this can actually be really good prompts for that.
Mhm, mhm.
How do people find you, Dr. Godfrey? If someone wanted to know more about you, your work, how
Yeah.
do they find you?
Uh, if you go to my website, familystrategies dot, or excuse me, floydgodfrey.com,
Mhm.
and I can type it into the chat. I don't know if that's open to
Yep.
everyone. So you can find more information about my research there. You can find information about me. You can find there's another link to the sexualized attachments research that I've done that you can also find there. Um, I'll write that in. And I would guess most answers you can get there. The book should be simple enough that the book itself might answer a lot of your questions. Um, and I will be at the IFTCC conference in a few weeks and would be happy to shake your hand or anyone who's out there. And I would just end too, Ali, by offering a lot of encouragement. Um, if you are struggling with some of this, be encouraged that God is good and He can lead you to the answers you need to be congruent with what He has taught. He can lead you to the answers to find growth and healing in your life. So don't despair. And even though everyone around you might be labeling you or you're getting messages about who other people think you are, it's okay. Stay grounded. There is hope and there is healing you can find in your life.
Thank you. That's such a beautiful way for a reminder for so many people who think they're completely stuck and there's no way out, and that there is help and resources and people like Dr. Godfrey who you can. I got my signed copy with him and got to take a photo, so I was very very pleased. And like you said, the resources are there, www.floydgodfrey.com. You can go to our website as well for the webinar for sexualizedattachments.com. We've linked that. I just want to honor your work, your time. Definitely had a tremendous impact on my work. And yeah, so thank you so much. God bless, and yes, hope we connect soon.
Thank you so much.